All right, ladies, we need to get started. We have a ton to cover in Leviticus. Before I start, though, in your resource page, in your binder, I forget what tab it is, but there's a list of a whole bunch of books that are like extra things that you can look at or that will help you in your study tips. There's one in particular called Unlocking the Secrets of the Feasts. It's a really actually short read. It is very easy to understand. It's written by a Jew who had grown up traditionally with all the feasts and things, and he makes some beautiful parallels between the feasts and Jesus. The first feast looking forward to his first coming, and then the last feast looking forward to his second coming. So you're going to want to read that. It's like I said, it's really short, it's really easy. I knocked it out in the afternoon, and I have my busy schedule, it's hard to find time to read extra books, so that one would be a really good one that I would recommend. Hey, Nancy, could you close that door, please? Thanks, sweet heart. It should be Unlocking the Secrets of the Feast, if I remember the title correctly, and the info should be in that resource page, and then you could look it up on Amazon later.
It's in the third tab.
Tab number 3. Yep. All right, Leviticus. Who's excited? Yes, thank you. I'm excited. I actually really enjoy Leviticus, not because of like all the laws and everything that seemingly doesn't apply to us today, but because of how much it shows God's character and especially his holiness. Holiness is a theme that you're going to see throughout this whole entire time, and it's such a big concept that I don't even think that we could fully understand it here on earth. So before we begin, I'm going to appeal to some of our younger generation, or if you like sci-fi, I'm going to give a fun illustration, but bear with me, even if you're not into zombies and stuff. But say there was a virus created in a lab somewhere. And it got out. No, that would never happen. And it's turning people to zombies. Left and right, it's just spreading. If you get scratched or bitten within a matter of days or even weeks, then you would turn into one itself. And within a few months, it's going global across the whole entire world. And so to save humanity from this zombie outbreak, the experts and scientists create a bunker. This bunker is going to be separate from everybody. It's going to be deep underground. It's going to have all the things that they need to survive, and it has to be completely clean of anybody who has been infected. They have to make sure all the stuff that comes in is completely washed and completely ready to go for an extended period of time, and then they're going to nuke the whole planet, wait till everything settles, and then reemerge. Unfortunately, as they're getting ready to go into this bunker to live for this extended period of time, at the very last second, one of the scientists gets bitten or scratched by one of the zombies and takes it with them. Now, while they're in there in this extended period of time, they do develop not a cure, not yet, but a pill, you would say, to help manage the symptoms. They have to continually take this pill on an ongoing basis to keep the zombiness from totally taking over everybody in the bunker. So they're still able to survive this extended period of time. They're able to go back out into the world, start rebuilding, but they also have to have rules on how to live in order to keep these symptoms at bay, and they need to keep producing this pill for everybody in order to live before they can finally develop a cure. You get this yet? Does this make sense? Okay, we're the zombies, if you didn't understand that. This disease is called sin, right? And instead of being bitten or scratched by somebody, we are born with this disease that will ultimately lead us to death. We are all infected. We cannot get away with it. And of course, the bunker being Noah's Ark, right? God sent a more righteous family to Noah's Ark while he wiped out the first plague of zombies, and so they can start to rebuild again. But then we still have the sin problem that they're dealing with now in Exodus. So God, being a holy God, being a just God, but also being merciful, provides a temporary fix for them. This is the little pill that they would have to take, right, in order to keep the zombie symptoms or the symptoms of sin at bay until a time where a cure could be found. And of course, we know that cure is ultimately in Jesus. So we know that coming from Exodus, we just finished the erecting of the tabernacle and everything that goes along with that. So now it's like, here is a surgery center that I'm going to place in the middle of your encampment that you can go to for help, for cures, for this temporary relief from your sin. But I'm also going to tell you how to live your life in order to keep these sin symptoms at bay. And that's the point of Leviticus, to be holy, to be set apart, to live your life in a way that isn't going to lead us into destruction, but make us closer to God. We call this process sanctification. Okay, so and if the tabernacle is a surgery center, if any of you ever had surgery or have been a nurse, you've had that Nazi doctor, right, who was like not going to let you cut corners or not going to let you skip a washing or not going to let anything out of the rules slip by, because he knows that that patient laying on the operating table is dependent on the nurses, the doctors, everybody in that room following every procedure of hand washing, of how they dress, of what they do, the tools that they use, all cleaned, all separate, all sacred, set apart, so that patient can have the best experience and not have any consequences later. And that's why a lot of these things go into so much detail, because the Levitical priests act like those doctors. And they have to be very specific, because God knows that if one thing gets changed or, oh, that one's not important, we don't need that one, it could be devastating effects simply. And you do see that going on as they enter the promised land and they start making little compromises, as they start not following the law to its full letter. Then they start worshiping other gods, and then they start getting away, and then God has to punish them, right? You see the effects of why this is so important. But it's not just for them to live a holy and separate life in the culture that they are. There's a lot of spiritual application that we can glean from Leviticus to apply to our own life today. So if we go back to the beginning, of course, the author is Moses, talking to the people of Israel after they were released from slavery. Remember, being in captivity for so long, Egyptian way of thinking was all they ever knew. Egyptians were very polytheistic, so there was all about the sacrifice and worship of multiple gods. God had to completely take this thinking that they had and remove it from them. So with we see the rebellion and the creation of the worship and of the golden calf. It was so easy for them to go back to what was familiar, what they knew, what they could control, and they had to be taught how to live a completely separate life. A fun fact, holiness is mentioned 152 times, more than any other book of the Bible. Our key verse is Leviticus 19:2. You must be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. And I think, again, we don't understand the gravity and the importance of what it means to be truly holy. In the Hebrew, holiness is pronounced kadosh, and I think it's somewhat close to Hebrew, kadosh, which means sacred, consecrated, dedicated, or completely set apart. So, as I just said before, we had just learned about Moses erecting the tabernacle. It's finally finished. The glory of the Lord is on it. And then we see later, looking ahead to Jesus in John 1:14, it says this: the Word became flesh and made his dwelling. He is the tabernacle, to tabernacle among us. And then we have seen his glory. Not just the glory of God in the fire and in the cloud, but now the glory in his one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The tabernacle was the symbol of God's presence in his people, and Jesus Christ was God present on earth. It's just amazing to me that God is so relational and so intentional that he would make a way for them in the desert to live among them in their very disease-filled life. First imperfectly in the wilderness and then perfectly through Jesus so that we could have relationship. I don't think we can appreciate God's love and what that means until we completely understand his holiness and his justice. So what are some of the themes in Leviticus? First, we see a law on sacrifice and offerings. A lot of these are for forgiveness of sins. Through them, we learn about the cost of sin, that we can't forgive ourselves. We need a sacrifice. And this goes all the way back to Genesis. Remember the first sin from Adam and Eve? They needed God to kill an animal to cover their shame and their nakedness. And so now we see that is a foreshadow of why Jesus had to be the ultimate sacrifice to cover our shame. The second theme we see is worship. There are 7 festivals, and all of those were designed to bring the focus back to God, to teach the next generation of God and his goodness and his provision for the people, but also to look ahead to Jesus and the prophecies and what he will fulfill on earth. We see, this is a huge one that we see in Leviticus, is health. Rules for handling food, disease, even sex. God was preserving his people from illness and a community with health, emotional, and spiritual problems. Okay, he gave them these regulations, including Sabbath practices, how to be right with God, because they were to be so separate from any other nation. They had to look different in every part. They were not going to be as stressed out. They were going to not have as many diseases, and they were going to have a way of worship that was different than any other nation around him. Health is important because a healthy body, mind, and soul makes our service to God more effective and shows his glory and power to those around us. Then, of course, like I said, we also see holiness, which is the biggest theme in this book, separated or devoted to God. God was teaching them a different way of living other than the Egyptian way. And so we are also to be separated from our culture and live differently in every aspect of our life. And then we learn a lot about the Levites. These are the priests and guardians of the law. Their purpose was to serve God and the people by executing and regulating all the commandments fully and completely. So they ministered to the people regarding their health, regarding their worship, justice. They administered the welfare system, taking care of the poor. And if you remember, the Levites were descendant from, Levi, one of the 12 tribes. And in Genesis, there's actually a very horrific account of Simeon and Levi, if you remember from our reading, who went and slaughtered an entire town because of the rape of their sister Dinah. This made Jacob really, really mad, and I don't think he ever forgave them for it, because at the end of Jacob's life, it says in Genesis 49, 5 and 7, it says this: Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and in their fury, so cruel, I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. So this prophecy comes true when they receive the land allotments later on in Judges when Joshua is giving out the land. Simeon has this really little tiny area of land kind of surrounded by Judah, and he never really becomes a great or strong tribe. And then Levi doesn't get land at all. They're called to something different. So just as Jacob has says, they are scattered they have towns all across the whole nation of Israel in order to fulfill God's plan for them. So part of this Levitical calling, I think, was punishment, but the other part was also redemption. Instead of violence, now they're going to be used as instruments of peace and intermediaries from the people back to God. And that's a beautiful thing. Now, because of Jesus, in 1 Peter 2:9, it says, but you now are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into the wonderful life. That means as priests, we have the same responsibility to lead our hearts and our families in the true worship of God and not in the idols and the things that this world chases after. To be cleansed daily by the power of the Holy Spirit and by his word for physical, spiritual, and emotional health. To be holy and completely set apart in how we as Christians live and act. In Matthew 5:18, it's Jesus talking, and he says, "For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." Everything is not when Jesus died. Everything was when he comes back and defeats sin and death forever and ever and ever. I mean, yes, death is already defeated. We do live in victory, but we still have the effects of sin that we have to deal with until he comes back. And that is what we are looking for till he fully accomplishes it. So, every word of what Leviticus says is really important, and it's useful for teaching, correcting, and training in righteousness, and that's 1 Timothy 3:16. And if every word is for our good and for teaching in righteousness, then it's written for a purpose, and it's not just a whole bunch of list of skin diseases and, things that we don't have to deal with anymore. This is for a purpose, and if it's for our good, then what can we learn from this? Jesus goes on to say, after this, he talks about how even murder and lust in your heart is sin. In your heart, you can break the law. We even see examples of this with circumcision. Under the old law, circumcision was a physical act designed to show the people that they are separated and committed to God. Now we have a spiritual circumcision of the heart, the cutting away of sin in our life. We see that with Sabbath. Sabbath isn't just a day or a list of things that we do or don't in order to find rest. Sabbath is in who Jesus is and finding rest in his presence. And we can see these spiritual parallels from the very specific laws we see in Leviticus to our everyday lives. And it's in that spiritual application that we can become more holy or sanctified in Jesus. So, the purpose of the Mosaic Law. The Mosaic Law was explicitly given to the nation of Israel and was made up of 3 parts. You have the 10 Commandments, the ordinances, and the worship system. And this includes the priesthood, the tabernacle, the offerings, and the festivals. So the purpose was to accomplish the following. Number 1, to reveal the character of the eternal God to the nation of Israel. This is so important because so many times, I'll know in my life, I've always looked to God for those big, powerful moments, right? The burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea, the slaying of the giant. But what I've learned being a Christian, that it's in the small habits, in the small practices, in the small ways that we live our lives that God's power is actually revealed more fully and completely. And that's what we see here in Leviticus. We already talked about being set apart as distinct from other nations. The law was also given to reveal man's sinfulness. It's given to provide forgiveness through the sacrifice and offerings for the people who had faith in the Lord and the nation of Israel, and to provide a way of worship for the faith community through the yearly feasts. Again, these feasts were a way to help gather the people, to help remember who they were as a community. It was a time of remembrance as they celebrated what God had done in the past, and it also foreshadows Jesus' first and second coming. Then it provides God's direction for the physical and spiritual health of the nation, which we have talked about, and then also reveal to all humanity that no one can keep the law perfectly. Everyone falls short of the glory of God and his standard of holiness. And this realization should cause us to not only appreciate God's love and mercy, but also rely on his grace every day as we walk in holiness or attempt to by his power. So there are three kinds of laws that you need to be aware of. First is the moral laws. Okay, these relate to justice and judgment, often translated as ordinances. These are said to be based on God's holy nature. And just as these ordinances are holy, just, and unchanging, their purpose is to promote the welfare of all those who obey. The value of these laws is considered evident by reason, so like common sense, okay? The moral law encompasses everything from justice, respect, sexual conduct. It includes the 10 Commandments, but it doesn't just stop there. But it also includes penalties for failure to obey the ordinances. Okay, these laws don't point people necessarily to Christ. It merely illuminates the fallen state of humanity. Next, we see ceremonial laws. Okay, these literally mean custom of the nation, and these are to distinguish them from other nations. The words often translated as statutes. These laws seem to focus the attention back to God, so they include instructions about regaining right standing with God, like the sacrifices and other ceremonies, things about being clean or unclean. Many of these were really practical, like wash your hands or bury your poop outside the camp. Yeah, right? But it's also to be a remembrance of God's work in Israel. The feasts, the festivals, specific regulations meant to distinguish Israelites from their pagan neighbors, and many things that you see to make them separate. We see Sabbath, circumcision, Passover, redemption of the firstborn. These all fall under this category. So a lot of these seem a little archaic and like we don't really have to follow them because now we have other things that we kind of substitute it with, but we still have the same responsibility to have customs in our own homes and worship in how we do things. That's why we come together every week on Sunday. That's why we do things like Christmas and resurrection, times of remembrance, and point our families to God and help us separate from the world around us. So, judicial and civil laws. This is about being a good citizen, okay? These laws were given explicitly for the culture and place the Israelites on, and encompass all of the moral law, except the 10 Commandments. Those were a little bit different. It includes everything from murder to the restitution for a man who was gored by an ox, so even accidental things, and the responsibility of somebody who is hurt. Like if you dig a pit and somebody falls into it, what is your responsibility in helping that person get better, okay? So the Jews really saw no difference between these God-ordained morality and their cultural responsibility. Okay, and it really should be the same for us. We should be good citizens. When something bad happens, if my dog bites you, I should be the first one to make it right, whatever it takes. And that's really what those laws were designed to guide the Israelites to. So, if you go into types of sacrifices, and this is what you're going to focus your reading on this next week, which is chapters 1 through 7. And again, sacrifice was nothing new. Many nations use different kinds of sacrifices to their God. But these specific sacrifices, and there are several different kinds, they were all meant to show different aspects of the redeeming work of Christ's blood on the cross. While they had to have lots of different kinds, Jesus fulfilled all of their needs in one sacrifice. But the thing is, we still have a part to play. We have to still deal with our own guilt, our shame, our idols, and put relationship with God and others first. The first sacrifice is called a burnt offering. This is a voluntary sacrifice. So it could be a bull, a ram, a male goat, male dove, young pigeon without blemish, depending on your economic status. But it had to be perfect. Many of these sacrifices had to have a perfect animal. There's a couple reasons for this. First, of course, is to point to Jesus as our perfect sacrifice. Secondly, because perfect animals were kind of hard to come by. It had to be really intentional in keeping that animal separate from getting a mark or getting sick or getting somewhere else. And it actually cost something. You couldn't just use any old sick lamb that was going to die anyways. Oh, I'll just sacrifice that. Here you go, God. No, it had to be a complete willing, God, I am devoted to you. I am all in. I am going to sacrifice this animal to show how much I love you. And you also see that they had to be burned. This signifies complete devotion. There is no going back. God, you are my God, and there is no other. So it's there to make payment in sins in general, and it's a free will. God's not going to force us into submission. He's not going to force us to serve him wholeheartedly. It had to be complete surrender. Next, we see the grain offering. This is also a voluntary one, and it could be grain, flour, bread, always without yeast, made with olive oil, salt, or incense. And this is to show the honor and respect for God and the worship of giving first fruits. This is also could be a kind of tithe, and just an acknowledgement that everything that we have belongs to God. Christ was the perfect man who gave himself to God and others, and we can do nothing else but show him that he is in control of our finances, of our time, of our children, by offering our first fruits as well. Next is the peace and fellowship offering. This is another voluntary one, and it could be any animal without blemish according to economic status. It could also be a grain offering. So this expresses gratitude to God. Have you ever felt like you were forgiven by someone or by God, but still not have peace with that person? There's still something between you. Okay, this is an extra step. So now you have forgiveness of sins. Now we're going to actually restore that relationship and have complete peace with God. So to symbolize this peace and fellowship with God, the person offering the sacrifice had to lay their hands on the animal. The word in the Hebrew for laying on of hands is samak, which means to lean on or put weight. It's not just a gentle touch, like, I'm going to keep this at arm's distance. You're going to put everything you have, your sin, your guilt, on this animal, and then slaughter it to remind that the cost of have our guilt and shame removed so that we can have true peace with God. Next is the sin offering, and this was a required one. It's both a personal one that you could do personally between yourself, but there's also one that you see the high priest doing for the whole sins of all the nation. Had to be a male or female animal without blemish, different animals for different positions or economic status, and it was also to make payment for unintentional sins, things of uncleanness, neglect, thoughtlessness. Okay, so to restore the sinner to fellowship with God and show the seriousness of sin. And then the last one is guilt offering. This is another required offering, another ram or lamb without blemish, and then to make payment for sins against God and others. And this is also about making compensation for your sin. There still had to be consequences for that sin. I think of my children when they break something, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I forgive you, but now you still have to clean up your mess. Okay, and that's what the guilt offering is different, to remove the complete guilt and to make restoration and follow through with the consequences of those sins. And we ultimately know Christ's death takes away the deadly consequences of our sin. So, in conclusion, all the law, every single word is still useful for instruction and reveals how sinful we are. So we're not under the law because Jesus fulfilled it, but we still have the same responsibility to live holy and pure lives, which is to love God and love others. Okay, so many of the Old Testament examples of moral laws give excellent examples of how to love God and others. Freedom from the law isn't a license to sin. Oh, God will forgive me later. Oh, it's fine. I can do what I want. Oh, I'll serve God by giving him my tithe, but then I'm going to go read the smut book during the week, right? There is no distinction. We can't pick and choose what we give to God and what we don't. We're either all in or we're all out. God, the law reveals God's love for us and that he is deeply interested in every aspect of our life. We show the love of God by living holy lives set apart for God's purpose. So my challenge, as you're reading, take a moment to pray first. God, reveal to me what I need to change, what I need to give up, what I need to completely surrender to you, to live the way that you would have me live. And I think that you'll find that Leviticus and its words becomes a lot more than just a list of rules of, things that we don't deal with, but it becomes much more meaningful in our journey of sanctification. And honestly, I would rather have the rules in Leviticus because everything is spelled out for you, black and white. This is right, this is wrong. Do this, don't do this. And now, under the new covenant, it's a lot more nuanced as the Holy Spirit reveals every person, right? And it's a lot messier and to understand. And that's why we need each other as community, and that's why we need the Holy Spirit. But the charge is the same. Are you mine? Do you see my love? Do you see my provision for you? And are you willing to do things God's way? So be blessed in your reading, and we'll see you next week.